Gyruss is a 1988 NES game by Konami. Originally released as an arcade game 5 years earlier in 1983, in the US it was released by Konami's subsidiary Ultra Games, but it is in all aspects a true Konami game and even got the silver label in Japan, but I guess in the US they had already filled their 5 game per year quota that year, so it had to be released under the Ultra title. Now most people think Ultra games were the more subpar games that weren't silver worthy, but that's not actually the case, as there were many great games under the Ultra label and likewise many turds in the standard Konami silver releases. I can see how Ultra gets that rep though, as it was commonly used to release games by other developers and publishers and sometimes just simple arcade ports, but regardless, this game kicks ass and is actually one of the only games of its kind on the NES.
How so? It's just a shmup.
Well, maybe you're not looking at it close enough. In fact, it's one of the only games of its kind really in existence, as I can only think of a few games that use its mechanics, and if you can list any more games than this, you're gonna get pretty obscure, and by that point, who cares? But maybe that sounds like I'm overhyping it. It's basically what I call a hybrid game. It basically takes Tempest and mixes it with Galaxian or Galaga. Otherwise, yeah, it's like a shmup in most regards, except for the way it plays. Instead of being either a horizontal or vertical auto-scroller shooter like all other shmups at the time, Gyruss put a spin on things literally by putting you in this space vacuum where you shoot and avoid things in this circular motion. He really made it a unique and different game from the rest. Now somehow it's been called and branded the Tube Shooter. I get the name, but I refuse to call it that, as to me that seems like a more fitting title for a frequent sperm donor. Guess I don't know what to call it. It's Gyruss, and that's good enough for me. Now this game is awesome. Maybe it's not for everyone. What you see is what you get. Space is constantly flying at you like a fucking Windows 95 screensaver, and that never changes. But it's pretty hypnotic actually, and there's nothing like playing this game in the dark on the big screen with the sound turned up. I love it. It fucking rocks. Now the arcade game was ported and released on every fucking Atari and ColecoVision system you can think of the previous console generation, but we're all based off the arcade version, and that's where this NES port really stands out. It's actually usually regarded that this NES version actually trumps the original arcade, and I subscribed to this thought for quite a while, but after recently playing the shit out of both versions, I can say that they both have things to offer and are different enough that the argument, not that anyone's really arguing about this, to me is now void, and why mechanically they're the same. The NES version really screams spiritual sequel to the arcade game by changing things up, adding bosses, more levels, bigger sprites and enemies, a supercharged version of the soundtrack, even reusing sound effects found in other Konami games like Contra, and a missile rocket thing not found in the original simply because that game only had one button. And it's just a different vibe, and the levels vary in comparison. For example, you don't see these guys till much later in the NES version, but in the arcade game they start showing up in level 4. So to me, I find that spiritual sequel is the best way to describe this situation, and now justifies the fact that I shouldn't have to compare the two anymore. The game was also released on the Famicom Disk System in Japan, and like most Famicom releases, it has a slight advantage over its NES counterpart with better sounding music and a more fleshed out ending cutscene with end credits, if you're badass enough to even get that far, but otherwise it's pretty much the same game, so no big loss. Anyway, let's begin and dive into this overlooked gem on the NES, that is Gyruss. First, let's briefly talk about the controls. There are two control schemes for you to pick from. You got your A-type and your B-type controls. Control A is your standard, more traditional control, much like the arcade original where you control the game using a 360 type motion to move around the screen. Now Control B only uses the left and right on the D-pad, moving your ship either clockwise or counterclockwise. Now both control settings work, and definitely try both, but pick one and run with it, as I doubt you'll get equally used to both. Now Control A I feel is the best way to play, and it can be the most natural and precise, as full use of the D-pad directions correspond with the 4 main quadrants on the screen, and your ship will stop dead when it reaches those spots. You can even control the game just using the hard directions, but you're probably better off using a circular type motion or a bit of both. I sometimes even find that I have my paw dead in the middle of the D-pad and I'm just rotating it around. Regardless, the controls are pretty tight once you get used to it, and after playing the game a few times, it gets to the point where you don't even have to think about it. Now I can see why Control B might seem a bit more convenient, easier, or more intuitive, but I sometimes feel I passed the exact spot I want to be in, and it just feels like I have more accidental oops, I meant to go that way type moments. So I really subscribe to type A, but you know, pick your poison, get used to it. Now I like playing fine on the regular NES controller, but it's worth mentioning that this is a great game to bust out your old NES Max controller or your old Advantage joystick, as the controller control scheme really lends itself to these controllers. But I do feel that you don't really need the turbo button, as the tempo of firing on this game is a little more adagio than your typical shmup. But if you want to use turbo, go for it, but maybe don't set it to max speed like you normally would, as you may get some dead shots when the tempo's too fast. Find that sweet spot that's most like your natural tempo when playing the game, as most of the time this is not really as fast as you can get them out sort of game. But alternatively, you can still use the button like normal even when turbo's engaged, and just hold the button down on bosses, and that can be the best of both worlds right there. So at the start of the game, you're shown a brief story, but according to the manual, our solar system is under siege and you must free our 9 planets from the Gyrussian forces of doom. And ultimate victory will only be achieved by freeing our solar system's life-generating sun. Now, I always thought this guy was like some devil or general representation of evil. It's not like he's the last boss or anything, and according to the manual, and I quote, "This is a neo-revolutionary portrait of the savage Genghis Khan." Really? I don't get it. I don't see a resemblance, but I'm not even gonna fucking go there. Bottom line is, this right here sums it up, and it's really nothing out of the ordinary. Save the galaxy from assholes. So you start at Neptune and work your way to the sun. Now here you may be feeling smart, noticing
Hey, the planets are out of order.
What? The planets are out of order? Well, no, they're not. On January 21st, 1979, Pluto crossed Neptune's orbit and temporarily became the 8th planet from the Sun. This is due to the fact that Pluto lies in a 2 to 3 mean motion resonance with Neptune, or some shit, meaning as for every 2 orbits that Pluto makes around the Sun, Neptune makes 3. And on February 11th, 1999, Pluto crossed Neptune's orbit again to resume its place as the 9th planet from the Sun, where it would remain for the next 228 some odd years. I don't know. Now, as this game was released in 1983 on the arcade and 1988 on the NES respectively, I think the people at Konami weren't stupid and were very aware of this fact. And I guess Pluto is no longer even considered a planet by the people who decide these things. And I mean, it's a Nintendo game, so who gives a shit? So that's that. Now the game starts off simple enough. There's 39 stages on the NES version and it takes about a minute per stage on average. You're told how many warps to the next planet and you fight some sort of boss every few stages, and then you go to a bonus chance stage where you can get extra stuff. The main thing is getting used to what kills you. On entrance, try to take out as many enemies as possible. They won't hurt you upon entering, but in later stages they may shoot out an asteroid or projectile of sorts that will. If you can take them all out, you get an extra 1,000 points, and if you can continue taking out these waves consecutively, the points will actually double each time. Now, points do matter in this game, mainly as you can get extra lives, and you will need them. This sound will be music to your ears. Anyway, if you don't manage to blast them all, they go ahead of you or past you to the center of the map where they stay as small dots. You can pick them off here as well before you catch up to them, or they come back to you, whatever. That's the thing about this game, it's sort of perspectively fucked up. Like, don't get me wrong, I like it, but are you traveling through space, or are they ahead of you, or are you catching up to them, or what? It doesn't matter. When they return from the center, if they cross your space at the edge now, they will kill you. Also watch out for asteroids and shit that come from the center that will also kill you. Sometimes they're the same color as the enemies, so if you notice something coming towards you, move bitch, get out of the way. Usually just a small nudge will get them out of your trajectory. Now when these things pop up,
Get that shit.
this item surrounded by these 2 things will help you out. The blue one is the one and only power upgrade in the game. Yep, there's only one. This game keeps it simple. This gives you a double shot and is really handy in the game, as it gives you a bit more firepower and widens the range of your shot. You lose this if you die. And then there's these yellow ones that give you an extra booster pod for your ultra lasonic phaser bank, which you can use by pressing the A button. You can have up to 7 of these, and I suggest you try to save them up for bosses and emergencies. If you do get around 7 of these, feel free to shoot one off if you need to, so you can refill. Sometimes there will be other items like a kill all enemies on screen, extra 1,000 points, or even 1-ups. These are more rare or more commonly seen in the bonus chance stages between planets. Now onto the bonus or chance stages as they're called. Here you can rack up on points and nothing will defeat you here. The enemies of a different color drop helpful items. Kill all 40 enemies for an extra 20,000 bonus points. Or you can shoot the number of enemies that happen to be the same amount of the stage that you are on, and you automatically get 30,000 bonus points. Pretty easy at first when you're on like stage 4 for example, so you just shoot 4 enemies, then you just sit there and you get the 30,000 bonus points. A lot of people do this, but I don't. I find it's worth the risk to try to get the extra plasma shots and shit, including the 1-ups, rather than just try and get the big score at the end. Plus in later levels, it's not easy to count exactly 38 or whatever amount of enemies you need to kill, as you can lose count, and if you're shy 1 or 2, then you lose both ways. So it's up to you how you want to strategize these chance stages, but I say go for the items, and shit, why not go for a perfect score? It's a game, why count and shit? Overall, there's not much else to say about the game, and there's no point in walking you through every stage of the game. Get used to the controls and style of play and what kills you. Learn to do little dodges and get out of the way, and you're pretty much good to go. But let's talk about the bosses and the infamous level 19. So most bosses are variations of the same idea, but they do get harder, and there are a small handful of unique bosses. So the first boss is the first of many similar bosses and is pretty much a no-brainer who makes sure you're used to the basic controls and hard directions mentioned earlier. So there's these pods that open up corresponding to your D-pad that shoot at you, and only when it's shooting at you is it open and exposed and can be damaged. Take these 4 nodes and pods out and you're done. You can use your phasers to take them out fast and with a single hit, but I think you should still be saving them up at this point if you're serious. But much like meteors and asteroids in the main stages that are impervious to your main weapon, your phaser will slice right through them and is the only way to take the pods out when they are closed. Take note of this for bosses later where your phasers will be more worthwhile to use. And that's that, moving on. The second boss is a unique boss to the game. It's basically a rock or some shit with this group of green balls. The rock circles around the screen, making it hard to get a clear shot at the green ball, so you have to shoot every one of these balls and turn it pink. Once the ball changes color, you're done. Now the shape and grouping and movement of these balls is pretty sporadic. Look for a good time to take off some shots. I kind of do what I'll refer to as a drive-by approach, where you cruise by, pop off a few shots, and then come back around again when it looks calm enough. The best time to go in is when it's not right on the edge of the screen and more towards the center, but use your best judgment. Also worth mentioning is every time you turn a ball from green to pink, a projectile will be fired at you that you must dodge or get out of the way for. You can hear a sound effect when you make contact right before this will happen. But earlier in the battle you may shoot many balls back to back, which also means many projectiles will be returned your way too. Again, your phaser will make this easier, but again, try not to blow your stockpile out on this guy if you can help it. The last one is always a bitch to shoot as it's protected by the others. Just be patient and keep firing and you'll get it. Puppy, stop barking. Now on to Uranus. The third boss on Uranus is similar to the first boss with 4 pods, but this time using the diagonal planes of the screen, making sure you have the control down for the diagonal angles. But this time the pod shoots these things that will follow you around. You can take them out if you feel overwhelmed if you want. The only thing is they sometimes block your bullets from hitting the target. Like the first boss, it helps to be firing on wake up before the pod even opens. Anyway, it's pretty self-explanatory and not too challenging. Again, your missile will take out the pod and all the stuff in its path, and if you've been saving them up, you can indulge yourself and fire 1 or 2 off if you like, but it's not totally necessary. On to Saturn. So I bet you're getting a pretty good picture of how these bass battles go. Same as the last boss, but with 6 pods total. These 2 fire this triple shot thing that's pretty slow and easy to avoid. These 2 shoot these things that follow you around like the last boss did, but it's not so overwhelming this time around. And the top and bottom pods shoot out these things with a cross on it that acts like a shield. You can't destroy this with your normal blasters. It's still not too tough. Now, if you're going to use your missiles on these types of bosses, try and get the most bang for your buck and aim between 2 of the pods and you can take out 2 at once. That's right, 2 for the price of 1. I'll buy that for $1. Also, I guess I should briefly talk about these boss sections. I keep referring to these as pods because I don't know what else to call them, and basically I don't know what the bosses really are. I can only speculate that there's some sort of ship like a Death Star, or maybe it's like a base of Gyrussian operations that each planet has. Regardless, let's move on. Now this is the infamous level 19. The stage isn't really out of the ordinary in itself. Like all planets in the game, the stages just get more challenging by throwing new shit at you, and that's to be expected. But what makes this stage so infamous is its boss, which is the second unique boss of the game, as it's not your standard Gyrussian base type boss. And to be blunt, this is the hardest boss in the game. And sure, that's arguable, but this motherfucker has that one factor that puts him number 1 in my book, and that is that he's a spirit breaker. He's the mid-game boss, as level 19 is the halfway point in the game, and this is where many people who played the NES game growing up either game overed, or if you survived, your spirit was fucking broken. You were lucky enough to have a few lives left, and you would probably die shortly thereafter, being stressed out on the now ever-increasing difficulty of the planets ahead. Now that being said, let's check this fucker out. So he actually starts off easy enough, so whatever it is seems it's already damaged. Its shell is falling apart, dropping scraps of debris that slowly makes their way towards the edge of the screen where it can damage you, but it's not hard to avoid. You blast away, slowly exposing its inner core, and then BAM! This hemorrhoid looking thing is now exposed and grows arms. Try not to panic, but I don't know what to say here. He's a bitch, but it's more psychological than anything. Avoid him and blast him best you can. It's hard to get a shot on him, but be patient. I believe your plasma shots do damage, but it's hard to tell as there's not always an indication of this. Stick and move, but if you get between the arms, try to watch their movements and stay away best you can. I can almost recommend the drive-by kind of approach, but again, that doesn't always work either. Sorry, I don't have more to say. It's just one of those infamously hard, cheap bosses, and it's always been that way. Moving on. The next boss has 8 pods. Yup, 8. How many can these things facilitate? There's these two things that come out of the north, south, east, west directions. They do a side swipe thing that can be devastating if it's in your path. So wherever you are, take out the one on your side and avoid going to the other sides till after they do their thing. Once you take one of them out, it makes a good little cubby hole pocket where you can chill and avoid the other ones without too much trouble. The other pod's to shoot the slow triple shot thing, and again, if you use your missile or phaser, try to take out two at once if you can. Other than that, it's pretty normal stuff, not too tough. So another unique boss battle. You have these 3 ships that come after you. The yellow one is pretty normal and can be easily taken out first. A single phaser shot will take him out. The other 2 ships are the pink one, who circles around at a medium speed and fires the homing shots you've seen plenty of times by this point. They come after you, so take them out if they're too close or avoid them. After you defeat the yellow one, you can focus on taking out Pinky or equally attack both when you have the chance. The last ship is this fast, squirrely motherfucker who's fast as hell and shoots these 2 circle things. He circles around so fast he's hard to hit, and if he's the last lone ship, he'll freak out and rotate in a constant circle, making him a fast-moving target. Not too tough, be patient and take your time, and you can come out of this relatively unscathed. And phasers, like in most boss battles, make it quicker and easier, but aren't really necessary. Next we have the second to last boss. Same as 2 bosses ago, but he has those 2 little things that follow you around and a couple of shields. Pretty standard fare at this point. Take out a couple of pods immediately and make a little safe zone, then slowly make the rounds. Next we have some sort of planet-sized brain. He's not too hard. Again, blast off a missile to take off some stress and have some sort of safe zone. It's like regular bosses in a lot of ways, but its weak spots are protected by these rock things. But of course these rocks have to shoot out towards you in order to have the weak spots exposed. He's really not too hard, and there's not a lot of shit flying around, which to me makes this pretty easy. Only catch is the rocks don't disappear after blowing up the weak points, unless your phasers are used to take them out. Once the brain is exposed, it starts shooting lightning bolt things at you. If you have phasers, 2 will take them out super quick. Otherwise, just pound them with normal shots as quickly as you can. This is a great one to use some phaser shots on at any point, but you may want to save a few at least for the final boss on the next planet. Now before going to the sun and facing the last boss, starting on stage 39, there's these fireball sun flare things that start showing up from the upcoming sun. It's good exposition of what's to come. In fact, this game has done a good job of this before. Like before the stage 19 boss, you actually see some of the little debris from the boss coming up before you actually get to him. It's a nice touch. Anyway, you get to stage 39, which isn't really a normal stage. All you have to do is avoid these fireballs. It can be quite challenging to avoid all these, and they are instant death if they touch you. In fact, I've game overed here quite a few times in my history with this game. I was so close. Anyway, you get through all the fire hazards and finally reach the sun. Yeah, I guess the last boss is actually the sun. Or I guess it's just covering the sun, keeping it captive or some shit. I don't know. I wanted to fight this guy. And so blast the sun, who berates you with great balls of fire. You can take some of these blue balls of fire out, but there are so many that you have to move. You do this for a minute and then, holy shit, it's eyeballs. Yup, a big ass eyeball that shoots out little eyeball minions to protect itself. Not sure what Konami's thing is with body parts and organs, but whatever. Like Life Force had all sorts of weird shit. But in this game you got your brain, your eyeballs, and a hemorrhoid. So it's important to take out some of these little eyeballs before they reach you. Pick a spot and take out as many as you can to make a cubbyhole safe zone. If you can take out 4 or 5 or better yet 6 in an area for you to hang back at, you should be safe. Otherwise you'll have to do some tight little maneuverings once the eyes arrive. The main eye will open so it can be attacked after the little eyes are deployed, and will also shoot some thin lasers at you that you need to avoid, or you can blast through them with your phasers. Once you take out a few eyeballs for your safe zone, tiny little dodges and little movements are the name of the game here. And that's pretty much it. Now you just need to outlast him. Once he turns into a pink eye, you're almost there. And then BAM! Off into the sunset. There's no cutscene like in the Famicom version, which sucks, but whatever. And then the game just starts over. Yup, no title screen, just starts over. I doubt anyone would really want to keep playing, and I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think it's any harder the second time around or anything. Seems to be the same shit, different day. So that's Gyruss for the Nintendo Entertainment System. In conclusion, it's a fun little unique space shooter, and it's the only tube shooter on the NES, if I really have to call it that. At the end of the day, it's hard as fuck, but it does a good job of getting slightly harder over the course of the game's progression. For me, it's always been the kind of game I had to warm up to play, much like a Donkey Kong or other old school arcade games like Q*bert or Robo Megatron. You just gotta get in the groove. Not much else to say. I know it may seem like a lot of the bosses are the same thing over and over again, but the game keeps them fresh, adding one or two little things each time to keep them different enough. The sound effects are great, and while there's not a lot of music tracks overall, what is here is memorable and solid. I've always considered this an underrated gem, but it seems it's not so rare or uncommon, and it seems people remember this game, so I'm not sure what's up with that. Maybe people just aren't playing it. So I'll just call it an overlooked gem, one that's definitely worthy of being in your NES collection, and it's not a game that should cost you more than $5, and even if you pay a few more bucks than that for a clean copy, it's still a fine deal. And in my opinion, it's one of the better games on the system, definitely on my top 20, and it's definitely my favorite shmup for the NES. Cool guys, thanks for watching, see you next time. That's right, I forgot to mention, yes, you can use what I'll call the Ultra code, which is the Konami code backwards. You input this at the title screen and get 30 lives. Like Contra, I really think it's a bit of a bitch move that cheapens the experience, but whatever makes you enjoy the game better, and I'm guilty of using it on occasion to experiment and strategize the game. But when I casually pop this game in, I don't use it as I like games with a high chance of impending doom, and I have beaten the game without it. Once.